wanted to make a video about the progressive members in the Senate first, unanimously supporting this huge bailout of corporations to the tune, I believe it's $4.5 trillion. That's trillion with a T. With obviously providing very little support to the average everyday person in the United States with this huge corporate bailout. It was supported by all the members of the Senate, including, progressives like Bernie Sanders, to a lesser extent, obviously Elizabeth Warren, Sherrod Brown, everybody else. And then, Bernie Sanders went on the Senate floor and gave a very impassioned speech about how this, was a really crappy bill because it just hugely benefited the corporations with this huge slush fund with very few strings attached and not providing a lot of help for the average everyday person in the US who's obviously, being impacted from a public health perspective from this coronavirus pandemic, as well as, the just complete meltdown we are experiencing right now in the economic realm. And, he gave a very impassioned speech about that. But then he goes and votes for this bill. And we can say the same thing with the House Representatives who voted on the Senate bill. I believe it was last Friday. It was, AOC gave a pretty impassioned response on the House floor about, again, the problems with this bill and how it was, really horrible coming out of the Senate, just very friendly to big business and didn't help the working people, the working class at all. But her, along with all the other so-called progressive members of Congress, also supported this huge, massive corporate bailout. So AOC, Ro Khanna, Ilhan Omar, Mark Pocan, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley, all of these so-called progressive politicians and leaders within the Democratic Party maybe, made their little kind of grandstanding speech, whether that was AOC or Bernie or anybody else. Those are kind of the two politicians that I saw and heard who, gave these speeches about how bad it was, but then they turn around and support it. I mean, it's when is the left in the U.S., when are they going to honestly develop any type of backbone to actually stand up and fight for these things that are really important instead of just caving in and just, grandstanding and saying how messed up and horrible this bill is because of the huge bailouts it gives to corporations with little to no oversight. They just roll over and say, well, this is really bad, but I got to support it. It's like, no, you dig in, you fight, you say, I'm not going to support this bill because honestly, it should have been. A lot of other people have pointed out, people like Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk and others have pointed out, this bill should have first been a bill for the people, for the working class, should have made sure that, their needs were met with things like, Medicare for all, rent mortgage freezes, canceling student loan debt, emergency UBI for the duration of this economic downturn. All of these things, have a people stimulus package first, get that done. People are obviously what's more important than bailing out these huge, massive, corrupt corporations that care only about, the bottom line, about money. That could have been handled later. Take care of the needs of the people first. So, if Bernie and AOC and others weren't just so ready to roll over and just do the bidding of the Democratic, establishment, that's what they would have done is like, no, I'm putting my foot down. I'm Bernie. I'm a so-called progressive. I'm going to stand up for what's right here. This, we shouldn't be giving $4.5 trillion to these corporations when we can't guarantee healthcare as a fucking human right, as basically the only developed or so-called industrialized country in the world to do that. We have, we're in the middle of a fucking pandemic, for Christ's sakes, and 3.3 million people lost their jobs. Means they're out of healthcare right now. Maybe I could support this. If you get Medicare for all in there, if you get emergency UBI, that's not just this one-time chicken shit payment of $1,200. That's means tested. That's not even going to go to everybody that needs it, especially most vulnerable and marginalized. Bernie obviously wouldn't be using the profanities. Well, I did hear him say the fuck word to a reporter when he was like asking him, if he's going to keep running. He's like, I'm doing a fucking pandemic right now, or a crisis, or whatever. So him or AOC or Rashida Tlaib or Ilhan Omar, any of these people could have easily done that and at least abstained or voted no, or tried to break up the stimulus so it'd actually be a stimulus package for the people first, and then worry about the corporate bailouts later. What's the point of having, electing these progressive leaders when they aren't really ready or willing to stand up and fight for the most vulnerable and most marginalized? Again, this is the biggest corporate bailout or takeover or just giveaway to these huge, massive corporations in U.S. history. And all of these so-called progressives in the Senate and the House voted for it. It passed the House unanimously, 96-0. I think the 4 were missing because some of the senators were dealing with the coronavirus or whatnot. And I'm pretty sure it passed pretty close to unanimously in the House as well. And it's very interesting. The only member in the House who was kind of vocal in their opposition to this was a libertarian Republican from Kentucky, representative, I believe his name is Thomas Massie, who is basically saying that, I want people to get on record. I want people to, go in the House and have to get on the record and say this. And he was making the point, everyday working folk, people at, Amazon, the healthcare workers, the grocery store workers, UPS, FedEx drivers, whatnot, they're all having to work through this. As Congress, this is kind of an essential job in a sense. They should be able to, come put their name on this, horrible vote. So honestly, I kind of agree with Massie on this, and he was making the point that basically, this is just a huge, massive $4.5 trillion bailout to the corporations, and he described it, the metaphor he used was kind of like a rat trap in this, measly $1,200 means tested check that's not even going to everybody in the U.S., especially the people that needs it. That was the cheese in this rat trap metaphor. And the trap's gonna come down, and that's that $4.5 trillion corporate bailout that we're going to be feeling the pain from for a long time to come. And again, there's basically no strings attached, no oversight. During Trump's signing the stimulus package into law, on his signing statement, he was basically already saying that we're not going to follow any of these regulations or oversight for any of this bailout money. So it's going to be up to, Steve Mnuchin, the foreclosure king, who should have been prosecuted by Kamala Harris while she was Attorney General of California for all of the corrupt shit that One West Bank did while he was the head of it. Also former top person at Goldman Sachs. So that's the person who's in charge of doling out these trillions of dollars to Wall Street and these massive corporations. One of their old cronies, Steve Mnuchin. It's like, what the fuck were these so-called progressives like Bernie, like AOC, like Ilhan Omar, like Rashida Tlaib? What the fuck were they thinking? They could have held out for so much, an enormously better stimulus package than what they got. Again, they could have known, like, fuck this shit, it needs to be divided. people first stimulus package. Once that shit gets done to our standards, then we'll go talk about the corporate bailouts. People need this shit first. Rent's literally due tomorrow. We need, rent, mortgage freeze, emergency UBI, Medicare for all, cancel student loan debt, improving, food assistance, the aid to hospitals, all of this. And then, the very little, these very tiny strings that were attached are things like, well, these companies receiving bailout funds can't bail out, or I should say can't lay off more than 10% of their workforce, but that's only for the first 6 months. And again, 10% is still a lot. After 6 months, they can, fire as many people as they want. It's just, what do they call it? It's just, kabuki theater. These progressive politicians like Bernie, who I really admire in a lot of ways, just totally caved in. Like, where's the fucking resistance? I mean, this is just disgusting. How about instead of that additional $4.5 trillion to these huge, massive corporations, when they've and Wall Street has already gotten trillions of dollars, because again, this was the third stimulus package. We could have given everybody in the U.S. like $30,000, $50,000 even for how much we've given out to Wall Street and these big, massive corporations. It's hugely disgusting and disturbing, and honestly, it frankly made me lose some respect for politicians like Bernie Sanders, like AOC, like Ilhan Omar, like Rashida Tlaib, like Ro Khanna, like Mark Pocan, like Pramila Jayapal. It's like, what the fuck are you doing? You're supposed to be standing up, fighting for the interest of the people, and here you go along and, support this $4.5 trillion bailout of these huge, massive corporations, and with no oversight, no strings attached. It's no equity stakes, none of this. It's like, what? I mean, I don't know if you couldn't tell. I'm pretty just upset and disgusted by the whole thing. And then the workers or the people here's your crumbs. Here's your $1,200 one-time check. And again, that's only if you filed for taxes in 2018 or 2019. And I mean, it doesn't help the most vulnerable or the most marginalized. The unemployment benefits expansion that Bernie got only lasted 4 months. Our economy is going to be fucked up, unfortunately, much longer than that, I think. The Fed's was the president of the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank had said, I believe it was just last week, we could reach 30% unemployment. That's higher than the Great Depression, but all they could come up with was this, $1,200 measly check that most people aren't going to get until 3+ weeks now, and it's going to be even longer if you don't have direct deposit on file with the IRS. This is the best that the so-called progressives in the House and the Senate could hold out for. It's like, where's the opposition? Where's the resistance? What's the point of, electing these so-called progressive leaders and politicians to the House or Senate or whatever it may be, if they're not actually willing to stand up and fight to take a principled stand when it matters the most? We are in a fucking economic crisis right now. We are spiraling into a Great Depression type scenario, and all they could come up with is, here's this fucking shitty $1,200 one-time means-tested payment. Again, that's not everybody is going to get. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous. Like, have some fucking moral courage. Have some moral fortitude, for Christ's sakes, and just don't go along to get along. I mean, both AOC and Bernie made these, impassioned speeches, and then they both go along to support the bill. It's like, what the fuck? Jesus Christ. I mean, do I need to stop donating to Bernie Sanders and just start, we honestly just need a fucking third party, a strong third party, fourth party, fifth party in this country, because it's a one party system. It's a two parties bought and paid for by the corporations. The only difference is, do you want, to support the party that's, maybe stronger on social issues, the Democratic Party, or do you want the Republican Party who, doesn't want, women to have, access to reproductive health care? And obviously, the Democrats Party is slightly better on social issues, but they're in lockstep with the, mainstream Republicans when it comes to just bailing out these corporations again and again, while the, average U.S. citizen is just getting royally fucked right now due to the pandemic and the subsequent economic crisis that we're experiencing. So again, just really disappointing to see, a politician that I really look up to in a lot of ways and just seems like a really good dude, Bernie Sanders, totally dropping the ball on this issue. And I don't have quite as high of regards for AOC, but I mean, still, you would think, this so-called self-identified progressive, this, champion of progressive issues, was just so willing to just go along with this, even though she made this speech. Why not abstain? Why not vote no? It was going to pass anyways. What's the fucking point of having progressives in Congress and the Senate if they're not willing to stand up and fight when the going gets tough, when, I don't know what else to say at this point, but it's just hugely disturbing that these so-called progressive politicians weren't able to take a principled stance when in fact it really mattered that they did, because again, people got the fucking crumbs from this package while the corporations and the very wealthy are going to be feasting on that $4.5 trillion bailout they're getting from the U.S. government, from the U.S. taxpayer. It's hugely disgusting and disturbing, and the left and the left politicians really need to wake up and realize they need to act a little more strategically and actually fight for things that they believe in, instead of just completely rolling over and dying to the benefit of the wealthy and the corporations. I don't know how else you can put it. It's just hugely disappointing and infuriating. Those are my thoughts. I would love to hear yours in the comment sections down below. Peace.